Welcome back to Your Real Estate Voice with Barb Schlinker, the weekly radio show that informs and educates you on how to buy or sell real estate with Barb Schlinker, the owner broker of Your Home Sold Guaranteed Realty. Barb, now that commission is negotiable, are buyers starting to question the value of even working with a buyer's agent?
I'd say yes, more and more. Actually, just the other day, I had somebody call me, and uh, the way he phrased the question, at first he said he did not have an agent. He wanted us to show him one of my listings. And I said, okay, well, I've got, people on my team that can do that. And then he said, well, let me ask you a question. Would you basically switch allegiance to me? It basically is what he said. Um, in order, so if I could buy the house and give me a discount, right? So that's really their objective. Is I think if they go directly to the listing agent, they're going to get a discount on the fee. But my answer was absolutely not. He says, oh, okay, well, I have a friend that's a real estate agent and I'll have that person show it to me. I said, fine. I thought you didn't have an agent. What happened to that? But it doesn't matter to me. I think there are some really good agents out there that know what they're doing, and there are some that don't. And so, um, it's up to the agent to sit down with the buyer and articulate their value. And that became the rule last year. Now that the buyer's agent commission is negotiable, they have to have in writing with their client who will pay their fee. And I just looked at one that came on one of my listings last week where he had that agreement that he wanted 3%, but if the seller didn't pay 3%, the buyer didn't have to pay. Sometimes they ask the buyer to pay, and that's their decision. The question is, do they bring value to the table? So, and that's the big question. So I would say right now, part of the problem is a lot of agents feel like they're told that if you sign an agency agreement, you have to be what they call a fiduciary. That means that you put your client's needs ahead of your own. But I've had some people violate that. I recently had an offer on one of my listings where I don't know what his agreement was with this buyer. There were competing offers on that home, and he insisted on getting his 3%. The seller was not willing to pay his 3%. So guess what? His buyer didn't get the house. So did he really put his buyer's needs ahead of his own? I don't think so. Then he sent an anonymous letter, I think it was him, to the seller saying, well, yeah, 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 she's about commission. And he's just started talking smack about me, which was kind of funny. But, at the end of the day, you have to think long term in this business. It's just not about the one-off sale. It's about what about, a couple years in the future when they decide to sell their home or they're going to move up or move down. A lot of people don't think about that. A lot of them it's all about the money. So um, many agents kind of go too far with fiduciary and they try to get stuff. Even do things that are a little bit deceiving to get stuff, which I think is a problem. I've had absolutely everything happen to me. So, but I've worked with some really good agents that are reasonable and fair, and they're not doing things like threatening not to close if they don't get what they want the way they want it before closing. Just last weekend, I had an agent call, and she was there at the house showing, and one of the neighbors came up and said, hey, can we go in with you and look at the house? And I appreciate that she asked me that question. There are some agents that really are not comfortable with the word no. But I said no. I said, you don't know who, I don't care if they're neighbors, are you going to supervise them when they're in the house? We're giving you the benefit of being able to show this home, but if you have two groups of people in there at the same time, are you really watching them or not? So I declined that request, and I appreciate that she asked me for that. Not everybody will do that. And a lot of sellers really assume that the showings going on are only qualified buyers. And that's not true. There's a lot of agents that somehow connect with buyers via some kind of online thing. And many times the very first appointment, the very first time they're meeting with the buyer is at the house. And I don't know what they're asking. The requirement is that they have to have in writing how they'll get their fee, but there's no requirement for them to verify that they qualify for the house. And so it could be a big waste of time. Sometimes these agents are using that opportunity to open a door and show a house in order to maybe get them to show another house. So at some point they will actually, buy something. And so some of the things that agents do that I think are really not worth it to buyers are is they really don't verify that the buyer has the ability to perform. Right. I've even had lenders call me and go, oh yeah, it's all good. They're all good. Then the next thing I know, they're terminating because they don't qualify. It's like, really? Didn't I already ask that question? Or and that's a bad thing because there are consequences. So if you accept a contract and then you go back on the market, then automatically other buyers and agents assume that there's something wrong with the house, not the buyer. And so it's unfortunate, and I have to usually field those questions when that happens. I have agents that will come in a home and actually state that they don't think the home is worth what the asking price is. Now, I don't know where they get that idea from, but it's a problem because it puts the idea, the buyers don't know, right? They're thinking that the agent is the expert on values and that house and everything else. So they're assuming that person has the expertise to make that call. I've seen them say stuff like it's not worth that much. I've seen them say stuff like, oh, this home won't be approved for this kind of financing that you want. There's no way. And that's really not true. So I've had agents put really faulty language into the contract that make it confusing. And technically, real estate agents are allowed to quote practice law by only filling in the documents that the lawyers created for us, the contract and the agreements. But sometimes I'll see these big, long paragraphs in blue that alter the contract and create all this new stuff. And technically, I would have to go back to an attorney to interpret what that means. Some of my favorite ones that I've seen are they'll put in this section of the contract that they say the seller has to disclose anything that affects the future value of the property and the buyer's future use. And I'm like, how would they know that? And why are you going to try to kind of open this liability door for the seller with a statement like that? So I always counter that one off because it doesn't make any sense. I've even gotten provisions in the contract that talk about the state of the world and crazy stuff. And at the end of the day, what the state wants and the way they've set up the real estate system here in Colorado is that they want the contracts to be understandable and not confusing, especially to the consumer. But at the end of the day, they don't require the agents to explain the contracts. It's not a requirement. They expect the consumer to read it and understand what they're signing. So sometimes they don't understand what they're signing. I like to explain it the way I know it, just because I don't want the seller to come back later and go, oh, I didn't understand that that's what that meant. But it doesn't have to be done. So there are some agents that just shove a 20-page contract to them and go, okay, read it, sign it, looks good to me, and that's it. So if you are thinking of making a move and you want somebody that has some good experience that has your back, give us a call at 719-301-3900 or go to barbhasthebuyers.com. Richard?
You're listening to Your Real Estate Voice. That's Barb Schlinker of Your Home Sold Guaranteed Realty, host of the program. And if you're thinking of making a move, call Barb at 719-301-3900 or visit barbhasthebuyers.com. When we come back, we'll be discussing the last two top reasons why having a buyer's agent may not be worth it. So, Barb, we're discussing why having a buyer's agent may not be worth it. What are some of the other reasons?
Well, there are some agents that will make that kind of statement, like, I don't think the home is worth that much, or it won't be approved for financing. And really what they should be doing is reaching out to the listing agent and asking that question. Maybe ask them, hey, how'd you come up with the price? That kind of thing. Because the buyers kind of understand market value. They look at the history. They do a lot of research. I just recently wrote an offer for a buyer and he goes, wow, they just bought it 2 years ago for this price. So they added 100,000 on top of it and all they did was paint. And the prices haven't really gone up that much. So it's hard for them to understand, why would I pay 100,000 more 2 years down the road when the prices have gone down, not up? There must be a reason. So, and then I get yelled at by the listing agent. Well, this is the asking price. If you're not going to bring a full price offer, why are you wasting my time? They just do stuff like that. And it's like, it's a negotiation, right? Hopefully we can come together and reach an agreement so that everybody can do what they want to do. The buyer wants to buy, the seller wants to sell. So I don't know why some people get all wound up about that stuff. And even if it's a low ball offer, it's not bad to counter. You never know where it's going. So I think negotiations actually is really not taught in the industry. A lot of them are just kind of messengers. And they may not know the backstory behind it, but at the end of the day, I would recommend sellers not get offended if they get a lowball offer and just counter what they will accept. You never know. But the problem is that if half the agents don't sell any homes, and then the other 40% only sell 2 or 3 a year, and then the top 10% are selling 3 or more homes a year, how does an agent really know what the value is? Looking at the comps is not working right now because there's more inventory on the market. It's not really moving the bar. But that's a good question. I think the buyers typically know more about home value than the sellers do. And I recently had a buyer where they wanted to move up to another house. They actually had competition when they made their offer. And the listing agent let me know, hey, there's competition on this home. And so the buyer's like, well, what should I offer? And I said, well, it's up to you, but I would recommend that you put your best foot forward because you have competition. Turned out the other buyer had made a higher offer. However, they had a house to sell. So there was uncertainty with that buyer, but there was certainty with my buyer. And so my buyer got the house at a lower price, but had they come in super low, it may have not worked. So it just depends on the situation, what the competition is. And that's why communication is key. And if you have an agent that's not asking the right questions, it could be a problem. I had one just a few months ago that just shoved an offer, never called me. I never saw it coming. And it's like, oh, okay, I'll present that one too. But, communication is absolutely critical if you're really working to try to get your client the house that they want and love. So if you are thinking of making a move, give us a call. Some agents absolutely are worth every bit of their value, and some of them not so much. So it's up to the buyer to make that decision, what that is worth to them. And the seller may contribute to the buyer's agent commission, but the buyer may have to pay for some of that. If you are thinking of making a move, give us a call, 719-301-3900, or go to barbhasthebuyers.com. Richard?
You're listening to Your Real Estate Voice. That's Barb Schlinker of Your Home Sold Guaranteed Realty. If you are thinking of making a move, call Barb at 719-301-3900 or visit barbhasthebuyers.com. A short break. When we come back, we'll be discussing the top 6 seller mistakes that can cause a house not to sell. Plus, we'll be talking about Barb's hot new listings. Don't miss that.